Lena possessed all the elements of an ideal wedding. A devoted fiancé and a secret she eagerly anticipated revealing. She was pregnant, intended to marry, was unexpectedly taken from her a week prior to the wedding. Altering what was meant to be the most joyous occasion of her life, her beloved had betrayed her. And her closest friend, the maid of honor, was complicit in the treachery. She could have departed, but why choose to leave when she could annihilate him? She chose to remain with us. For this wedding is on the verge of becoming the ultimate reckoning. Lena stood before the mirror. She delicately traced her fingers over the lace of her bridal dress. The fabric was pleasant to the touch, fragile beneath her touch. The elaborate floral designs stitched with minute pearls captured the golden radiance of the room's fairy lights, creating an ideal ambiance, precisely as she had always envisioned. She inhaled deeply, allowing the truth to permeate her consciousness. In less than 1 week, she would be walking down the aisle to marry the man she loved. The thought elicited a surge of emotion. The warmth radiating from her chest caused her tummy to quiver, signifying that he was not merely her fiancé but also her closest friend, her sanctuary. The guy upon whom she had constructed her future. They had endured numerous trials together. And now they were at last upon attaining the moment she had envisioned for years. She could already envision his smile as she approached him, the sensation of his hands enveloping hers. The assurance reflected in his eyes as he uttered, "I do," elicited a smile from her as she positioned placing her palm on her abdomen. She instantly recognized that there would be 3 of us. And this understanding elicited a surge of happiness within her. She discovered it only 2 days earlier and had kept it confidential, intending to surprise Mark in the most extraordinary manner possible. Envisioned it numerous times, perhaps during their honeymoon or the night following the wedding. Nestled close in bed, he would grin, embrace her, rub his forehead against hers, and mutter something akin to, "We are going to be parents." His voice would be softly amazed, as he frequently expressed a desire to have children in the future. This infant exemplified their love, marking a new beginning as everything aligned for them. Accompanied by a knock at the door, Lena's thoughts were interrupted by Sophia's voice, which resonated through the room as she entered. Her blonde hair, visible hair secured in a loose updo, adorned in one of the silky robes that Lena had bestowed upon the bridal party. "Oh my God. You look stunning." Lena turned to her beaming companion and asked, "Do you think so? Are you joking?" As Sophia walked away as she caressed the intricate needlework of the dress, Lena softly remarked that Mark would lose his composure upon seeing her. Sophia smirked, feeling her cheeks flush with warmth. "I hope he does not, as not every man should marry someone who resembles a fantasy." Lena jokingly rolled her eyes, however. She could not conceal her feelings. Sophia's heart thrilled at the prospect of Mark meeting her for the first time tomorrow. As she collapsed onto the bed, Lena acknowledged feeling slightly nervous when sitting next to her. "Not about marrying Mark, but rather for another reason. I am uncertain about the wedding. I worry about tripping while walking down the aisle or saying something foolish." "Sophia," she dismissed her. "But even if you do, Mark would remain infatuated with you." Lena grinned, feeling momentarily reassured. They sat in comfortable silence, which had settled between them. Sophia had been her best friend for years, the one who she had been at her side through all heartbreaks, work challenges, and late-night crises. She was like a sister to her. "Tomorrow, she will stand beside Lena as her maid of honor. I can hardly believe it is finally occurring," Lena mumbled, gazing at the shimmering ring on her finger. "I recall how Sophia playfully prodded her. It seems as though it was but yesterday when we were seated in your small apartment, consuming wine and laughing about the lack of value in the men you dated." Lena reminisced with laughter. "And now I find myself marrying the guy of my dreams." Sophia acknowledged this, although something lingered. A fleeting expression crossed her face too swiftly for Lena to perceive, before she could contemplate it more. Sophia began again. "You truly," Lena unequivocally, "loved him. And she genuinely meant it. Mark was not flawless, nevertheless. He was significant. He had consistently exhibited ambition and a strong emphasis on his job, nonetheless. She had never questioned his affection for her, as he was charming. They are successful and self-assured, readily attracting others, albeit occasionally prone to distraction despite not being the most emotionally expressive person. He was highly determined and had built his identity from the foundation. Lena respected that quality in him. She was certain. Deep down, that Mark loved her. She was certain of it. Wasn't she? A small, persistent doubt lingered, intruded onto her thoughts. Yet she promptly dismissed it. Naturally. He had proposed in the most exquisite manner, a private rooftop meal, illuminated by dazzling fairy lights. With romantic music playing in the background as he held her, he gazed into her eyes and uttered all the appropriate words. I cannot envision my life without you. Marry me. He had captivated her. To feel special, adored, and chosen was paramount. Do you ever contemplate what life would be like post-Sophia? Lena abruptly inquired, tilting her head following Sophia's remarks on the wedding while reclining against the pillows. Once the fairy tale concludes and normal life resumes, do you believe circumstances will alter? Lena contemplated this. It is likely, but positive, that we will develop together, resolve issues, possibly purchase a home, and establish a family with her. Her hand reflexively returned to her abdomen. After a little moment, Sophia grasped her hand, applying pressure, gently. I expressed my happiness for Lena, and she appeared sincere. The moment swiftly elapsed, and Sophia rose to her feet, stretching. The bride to be acknowledged. You should rest. Tomorrow is a significant day. Lena nodded in agreement while standing beside her. Sophia embraced her tightly before proceeding to the door, wishing her beautiful dreams as it clicked shut behind her. Lena sighed deeply, moving back to the mirror, where she gazed at her reflection for an extended while, her fingers grazing over the bodice of her dress. Since tomorrow she would become Mrs. Mark Spencer, a role for which she had never felt more prepared. Gazing at the ceiling, she listened to the subdued buzz of the city outside the windows. Sleep eluded her as her mind was overly active. She was consumed with thoughts of tomorrow, contemplating the vows she would utter and the life she was about to commence. Her phone rested on the bedside while she contemplated texting Mark, pondering what she might convey. I can't sleep. Are you awake? It felt he was likely already in bed, fatigued from the extensive wedding preparations. She sighed as she sat up, contemplating inhaling fresh air would assist in clarifying her thoughts. She exited the bed, seized her silk robe, and enveloped herself in it prior to exiting the bedroom. The flat was shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the faint radiance of city lights permeating through. As she approached the balcony via the floor-to-ceiling windows, she halted, hearing muffled laughter resonating deeply from Mark's office. Her heart raced. Was he still awake? And on the phone the sound was excessively distinct. Someone was there with him. She paused for merely a moment before advancing closer. The door was not completely closed, merely ajar, allowing her to glimpse the warm golden glow of the desk lamp. Mark's voice resonated from the corridor, expressing disbelief at his decision to proceed. Lena grimaced, her fingers curling around the edge of the doorframe. Then Eric's voice mentioned Mark's best friend. I anticipated you would reconsider by this point. What became of all the discourse of marriage as a confinement? Mark laughed. Lena is ideally suited for the job, exuding a casual and relaxed demeanor, characterized by her sweetness and devotion. Lena, utterly oblivious, experienced a twisting sensation in her gut, prompting Eric to laugh heartily. Mark asserted that you will really secure this. And Lena caught the snicker in his tone. He said, I mean, she is. The trophy bride archetype is attractive and intelligent enough to maintain intrigue, yet insufficiently discerning to challenge circumstances. I observed something cold and pointy embedded in Lena's chest, rendering trophy wife entirely oblivious to her breathing. Her heart slowed, pounding so intensely that she could hear it in her ears. Eric took a deliberate sip of his drink, and she felt nothing. Sophia Lena's body became frigid, and she ceased respiration. A moment of silence ensued before Mark breathed a chuckle. If she were to discover the truth, would shatter her like a china doll. She venerates the very ground I tread upon. And it was excessive. Lena tightened her grip on the doorframe, her nails embedding into the wood. Eric emitted a low whistle and inquired, how long has it been? Mark swirled his whiskey, observing the ice clink against the glass. A few months ago. It was merely intended to be a singular event including beverages and amusement, however. Sophia elicited a sinister chuckle. Lena chewed the inside of her cheek with such intensity that she tasted blood. Captivated by Sophia, her best friend only hours before, she sat on her bed, smiled at her, held her hand, and expressed her happiness for her. Nonetheless, the betrayal weighed heavily upon her. It was stifling. Yet Mark remained undeterred. He reclined in his chair, stretching as though this were merely a routine occurrence following the wedding. I will persuade Lena to endorse a prenuptial agreement, presenting it as a measure for our financial stability, smirked. And when I am disinterested, I will transition to another individual. Eric scoffed. Indeed, my friend. Mark remarked that marriage is merely a transactional arrangement, viewing Lena as a mere investment. With no regard for her significance, returned to her room before the sobbing overwhelmed her. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, her legs collapsed beneath her. She sank into the floor, her back against the cold wood, her hands trembling as they covered her mouth. She attempted to stifle the gasps emanating from her throat as her body trembled uncontrollably under the burden of what she had just heard smothering her. Mark, the guy she had loved, trusted, and given everything to, had deceived her, while Sophia, the woman she saw as her sister and closest confidant, had been engaging in an affair. He stood behind her as her hands trembled while gripping the porcelain sink. The trophy wife remained entirely oblivious, lost in thought each second she spent with him. Every instant she laughed at his jokes, kissed him, and clutched onto him as if he were each time she defended him after his late return. She invoked her sanctuary and convinced herself that his distant demeanor was due to stress. She contemplated the authenticity of their love, recalling the nights Sophia had spent over and the moment she had gazed at Lena. She gazed into her eyes and expressed how fortunate she was to have a partner like Mark. It felt surreal, akin to a cruel jest that she had endured, awaken at any moment. And despite her numerous pleas to the universe to reverse time and return her to prior to her passing through that door, her stomach twisted agonizingly, with nausea surging once more. She compelled herself to suppress it. She could not afford to exhibit weakness at this moment. She curled inward, her arms encircling herself. She protectively encircled her stomach, feeling a fresh surge of emotion, anger, fear, and heartbreak, regarding her child all intertwined in a stifling knot. What manner of guy perpetrated this? What kind of father could grin at her and kiss her, discuss their future while scheming to betray her as soon as she was legally obligated to him? And Sophia, numerous occasions had she sat opposite Lena, sipping wine, laughing, and expressing her enthusiasm for the wedding. How many times had she persuaded Lena that Mark loved her and that she was fortunate to have him, while secretly mocking her throughout this entire period. She had muttered to Mark after each call, deriding her for her naivety, causing Lena to clench her jaw. She wiped her wet cheeks with the back of her hand and resolved to pack a suitcase and vanish before dawn. Having accumulated sufficient savings, she could purchase a last-minute trip, go to a different place, and raise her child independently. However, then, Mark's voice echoed in her mind. Should she ever uncover the truth, she would crumble like a delicate porcelain figurine, fragile. Her entire body stiffened as her fingers gripped the silk of her robe. Her breathing slow and deliberate. She was resolute. She would neither falter nor flee like a spurned lady weeping in a hotel room in an unfamiliar place, in a place where her identity was unknown. She refused to grant Mark that victory. Instead, she would offer him a wedding he envisioned, a flawless, enchanting storybook ceremony, only to have her subsequently devastate his entire existence. She pressed her nails into her palm with sufficient force to cause pain. He had deceived her, humiliated her, and now it was her turn. She contemplated every possibility and potential action, realizing she required assistance from someone. Mark knew only one individual who was not already in his favor: James. Mark's younger brother. The only person in his family who had truly seen her was James, his younger brother. She gulped audibly, her fingers tightening around her phone as she browsed through her contacts. She realized she had never called him at this hour before. She had never needed it. But tonight was different. Her thumb lingered over his name for a moment before she compelled herself to push call. The line rang once after 2 attempts. A sluggish voice responded. Lena noted the immediate transition in his tone from drowsy to concerned. What is wrong? She opened her mouth, yet no sound emerged. The lump in her throat returned, dense and oppressive, And for a brief period she believed she would be unable to talk. James must have detected this. "Hey," he murmured, his voice now lower. Breathe. Talk to me." Lena shut her eyes tightly, pressing a hand to her forehead. When her voice eventually emerged, it was in a hushed tone. "I implore you to meet me." There was a momentary silence. "Where are you?" "At home. I will arrive in 10 minutes. No, with no hesitancy and without questioning. Only a peaceful conviction. Lena withdrew the phone from her ear and gazed at the screen until the call was terminated. Her hands continued to tremble for 10 minutes, however. This time it was not due to grief, but rather from something significantly colder and harsher. She had reached her choice. The cafe was practically vacant at this hour, save for several late-night patrons, crouched over their beverages, who appeared absorbed in their own thoughts, while the air was infused with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Lena, seated at the corner booth, scarcely acknowledged the sweetness as she tightly clasped a cup of tea her meal had long since cooled. And her leg hopped beneath the table as she fought to remain composed. Regulate her breathing, and maintain her composure, however. The instant she observed James entering through the door, something within her fractured slightly. He appeared as though he had donned whatever garments he could locate: black pants, a place t-shirt, and a hoodie pulled over his head. His hair was somewhat disheveled, with remnants of sleep still evident on his face. But the moment his eyes met hers, all of that vanished. Lena had always perceived James and Mark as fundamentally dissimilar. Despite their fraternal relationship, with Mark being refined and astute, James has a distinct presence characterized by unwavering calmness and controlled precision, like a tempest uncertain of its ferocity. He appeared to be precariously balanced on the brink. He slid into the booth opposite her, his attention scrutinizing her face, noting her red-rimmed eyes and the manner in which her fingers she trembled slightly as she set her cup down. "Tell me everything," he ordered, his voice low yet firm. Lena gulped. She had not permitted herself to weep, having confined herself in her chamber earlier. She had resolved not to allow another she wept for Mark Spencer, yet suddenly found herself opposite James. Someone who genuinely cared and was not deceiving her. Something within her faltered as she breathed unsteadily, clutching the edge of the table while she compelled the words to emerge. "I overheard him whispering to Eric," causing James's jaw to tense and his hands to clench into fists on the table. Which Lena perceived her throat constricted. "He does not love me. Nor has he ever. I was merely a trophy to him, a method to enhance his reputation." And Sophia emitted a harsh, tremulous chuckle. "It has been her all along. My closest companion boasted about it as if it were a jest." James's countenance soured while Lena's fingers clenched into her palms, her nails digging in, applying pressure on her skin. "And following the wedding, he intended to have me sign a prenuptial agreement. Subsequently, when he became disinterested, he was..." James inhaled sharply, sitting back in his seat, his fists clenching and unclenching. He was grappling with the urge to strike something. When he finally spoke, his voice was taut with restraint, anger. "I always recognized Mark as a self-centered individual," he mumbled while shaking his head. "But this situation is unprecedented." He sighed, gradually attempting to regulate his breathing. Sophia inquired, "Are you certain?" Lena emitted a hollow laugh, remarking, "Oh, he accomplished it quite impressively. It is evident that she is addicted." The term left a bitter taste in her mouth as James murmured something inaudibly. She perceived a faint utterance, resembling a curse, as he momentarily diverted his gaze and ran a hand through his hair as he attempted to comprehend everything. His gaze met hers once again, and his demeanor softened marginally. "What are you?" Lena inhaled deeply as he calmly inquired about her intentions. "I contemplated fleeing, abandoning everything before the wedding." James observed her, contemplating her perception of him. She articulated her thoughts with increased steadiness, likening herself to porcelain, a doll, something delicate and breakable. "He believes I will shatter upon discovering the truth." James's mouth twitched. Lena straightened her posture, the fire within her intensifying. "I am not fleeing, James. I refuse to concede. I desire to ensure he has the anguish of witnessing his entire world disintegrate before him." Gradually a dark sneer curled at the corner of James's lips. Yet his eyes retained a serious demeanor. "So, you desire vengeance?" Lena did not. James hesitated, nodding while tapping his fingers against the table as he contemplated her comments without attempting to convince her against it. He refrained from feeding her trivialities about its lack of worth and the necessity of being the greater person. Instead, he leaned forward, putting his arms on the table, and spoke in a low voice. "Then let's make it count." Lena blinked. James's visage hardened. "Of course I am. Do you think I will allow him to evade consequences?" he mocked. Spend his entire existence trampling others, believing himself invulnerable. Nevertheless, this time, he experienced an unusual blend of relief and enveloped Lena as she recognized her profound desire for someone to have faith in her. She was not irrational for desiring to annihilate the man who had obliterated her. James cracked his knuckles, gaze focused. Lena, resolute, inhaled deeply and stated, "We shall allow him to believe that nothing is amiss, feign injury yet exhibit forgiveness. Akin to a woman whose affection is so profound that she cannot depart. I allow him to believe I am captivated by him." James acquiesced. "And while he remains self-satisfied, I will gather evidence, including messages, photographs, and any other pertinent proof. Ensure there is no possibility for him to evade responsibility." Lena locked eyes with him, her heart racing, and then continued on the wedding day. "We revealed him to everyone." James leaned back slightly, a gradual grin emerging. "Now that sounds like," Elena breathed as her fingers finally unclenched for the first time since hearing Mark's voice through the door. She had an emotion beyond agony. She felt empowered. James grasped his coffee, took a sip, and then placed it down with a chuckle. She thought, "This will be enjoyable." Lena observed him, feeling a change within her. She had always been fond of James. However, she had never observed him in this manner before. Concentrated, resolute, and steadfastly positioned beside her. He underestimated her, which would become his gravest error. The following morning, Lena awoke feeling altered, albeit not unburdened though not at peace. She felt as if every part of her had been meticulously stitched together overnight. Something constant, something unwavering. The pain remained profound. Yet she resolutely chose not to reveal it. Not yet. She lay in bed, gazing at the vacant space opposite her. Mark had remained at his bachelor party the previous night. She may have trusted him without reservation. Envisioning him among his companions in laughter as she drank, she counted down the hours till she became his wife. Now, she was more aware. She inhaled deeply before compelling herself. By the time Mark returned home that afternoon, Lena was in the kitchen, having prepared herself for the role she needed to do, meticulously laying a sherry board for the two of them. She discerned his footfall as he approached with confidence. He approached her confidently, exclaiming, "Hello, beautiful," as he wrapped an arm around her waist from behind. Applying pressure, he kissed the side of her neck, causing Lena to pause momentarily before turning her head to grant him access. A faint smile appeared as she softly said, as though she had been anticipating his arrival all day. Mark grinned, gently squeezing her hip, and asked, "Did you miss me?" Her stomach churned, yet she emitted a subdued giggle, leaning into him sufficiently to render it credible. "Did you? Last night was enjoyable." Mark approached the refrigerator and retrieved a bottle of water. "It was somewhat chaotic as Eric became excessively intoxicated. We believed we would need to transport him home." Lena acknowledged this and resumed her focus on the board, meticulously cutting a wedge of cheese. Her hands were steady. It seemed like an enjoyable moment. Mark twisted the lid off his bottle and took a sip while observing her. "Okay." Lena blinked and glanced upward. "What do you mean?" Mark scrutinized her for a time, as if attempting to decipher something. "Her face is unfamiliar. You appear altered." Lena's lips formed a subtle smile. "I am getting married tomorrow. It is likely sufficient to cause any woman to behave somewhat differently," Mark remarked with a chuckle while walking. He positioned himself behind her once more, his hands gliding up her arms. Her feet chilly, she twisted inside his grasp, gazing up at him, her expression revealing her emotions. She exuded a gentle, nearly timid demeanor, seemingly unrelated to you, and everything about the wedding guests captured his attention. Mark immediately relaxed, relaxing his grip on her as he chuckled. "Babe, you're Everything will be great the moment you walk down the aisle. None of the previous concerns will hold significance." Lena breathed and nodded. It was as if he had spoken precisely what she required to hear. "You're right." Mark leaned in and kissed her forehead. "I always am." Lena compelled her to surrender to the contact, allowing her body to relax against him. It had become a contest of dominance, and she was resolute in her defiance. The days preceding the wedding were akin to a meticulously orchestrated show in which Lena participated. She executed her act beautifully, smiling when Mark touched her, laughing at his jokes, and feigning the persona of a love-struck fiancé despite her past. Her intellect was sharp and focused. He initially accepted it, but Mark was astute, and despite that, he relished the notion that he had Lena under his control. He was not oblivious to the change in his demeanor on the second day. There were discreet, prolonged glances when he believed she was unaware, and his arm lingered around her waist for just a moment. His voice was somewhat more cautious as he spoke. "You're really quiet," he remarked abruptly. Lena looked up. Fidgeting confusion marked Mark's gaze, his face suddenly inscrutable. Lena smiled as she closed the magazine. Reflecting on how different things have been these past few days with Mark, he inclined his head slightly, observing her. It was not negative, but a curiosity. She exhaled softly, shaking her head, and remarked, "I swear, if I hear regarding wedding jitters, I feel as if I might lose my sanity." Mark smirked while reaching for her hand, saying, "I understand. It is a significant event. You are on the verge of becoming Mrs. Spencer." Lena compelled herself to blush while gazing at their entwined hands. Mark's fingers glided over her knuckles as he brushed his thumb across them. "You're not experiencing any hesitation, are you?" Lena's chest constricted, however. Her smile remained steadfast as she gently clasped his palm, gazing up at him with the appropriate degree of vulnerability. Mark maintained his gaze for a little longer, as if probing for something beneath the surface. He exhaled with a grin, pleased. For once the words, "I do," are uttered. "There is no turning back." Lena smiled in response, unaware of the implications, while James remained a constant presence on the periphery. Steadfast and resolute, they convened clandestinely, shielded from the scrutiny of Mark and his circle. Late at night, nocturnal telephone chats, muted dialogues in concealed spaces, and shared looks in bustling environments. It was peculiar how she had rapidly learned to depend on him, since his presence seemed to stabilize her when everything else felt chaotic. Tonight was no exception. They sat opposite each other in a secluded café, distant from the main thoroughfares, where they would not be recognized. Lena absently stirred her tea, observing James's fingers rhythmically tapping on the table when he had that familiar expression again, characterized by a subtly clenched jaw, indicating to her that he was suppressing her emotions. She murmured, "You need not do this. You know." James's gaze rose to meet hers. "Do what? Assist me?" She placed her spoon down and tilted her head. "You are jeopardizing much by engaging in this." "Mark," her brother James mocked, shaking his head. He said, "Don't remind me." Lena offered him a faint smile, and James reclined, inhaling gently. "Lena, let's be candid. Do you believe I would passively observe him treating you in this manner?" She blinked, taken aback by the emphasis in his voice. He ran a hand through his hair, displeasure evident on his face. "I have devoted years observing Mark exploit individuals. Treating them as inconsequential filled me with disdain. Nonetheless." He waved between them, indicating what he intended. Lena experienced an unusual tightness in her chest as she questioned why James hesitated for merely a moment prior to leaning in. The voice became quieter. "As you did not merit this." An intangible change occurred in the atmosphere in that moment. None spoke. The world outside continued to progress, with automobiles passing by and distant laughing emanating from elsewhere. The gentle murmur of the coffee machines resonated. Yet in this space between them, a profound stillness prevailed as Lena released her, as she stared at her hands. She whispered, "I no longer recognize who I am. Everything I once believed in has dissipated. All that I believed to be true was really an illusion." James remained silent initially, but after a moment of hesitation, he extended his hand. His fingers grazed hers across the table. It was neither strong nor demanding, merely a subtle presence presenting something she questioned her worthiness of. She gazed upward, her breath momentarily faltering. "You remain unchanged, James," he stated, his voice unwavering. "You are merely perceiving things with clarity now." Lena gazed at him, her heart racing for reasons she did not wish to acknowledge that. For the first time in drowning, she was not suffocating air, gasping for air, or battling to survive, to prevent herself from disintegrating. She realized she was merely present with him. The notion astonished her, prompting her to retract her hand swiftly as if she had scorched herself while folding it into her lap. "This isn't the time, is it?" James scrutinized her for an extended minute before exhaling a subdued giggle accompanied by a headshake indicated disagreement. It was not Lena. She compelled a grin, disregarding the peculiarity. "Experiencing internal turmoil is beneficial, as I cannot permit distractions." James reclined while observing. She anticipated a different response from him, perhaps a tease or a slight provocation. But he remained silent. He remained seated, allowing the stillness to linger and permitting her to initiate any progression, which exacerbated the situation. She cleared her throat, adjusting her position in her seat. "So, what is next?" James exhaled through his nose, nodding slightly as he allowed the moment to elude us. "We adhere to the strategy." Lena acquiesced, compelling herself to concentrate on the plan for retribution against Mark. She needed to recall the reason for her presence and the circumstances surrounding it. But when she exited the cafe that evening, the cold air nipped at her skin, and she could not dispel the sensation that something had transpired between her and James. Transformed. This frightened her more than anything. The church loomed as a monument to perfection. Enveloped in gentle light, golden light emanates from its tall stained glass windows, sending vibrant reflections over the polished marble floor. The atmosphere was laden with expectancy. As murmurs of admiration circulated among the finely attired guests, everything was impeccable: the ivory roses adorning the aisle, the gentle melody of the string quartet, the sharp fragrance of luxurious cologne, and freshly cut flowers epitomized the wedding market's desire. Grand, opulent, and spectacular. And there he was, at the altar. He epitomized the image of a triumphant groom. His tuxedo was impeccably cut, and his hair was meticulously manicured, exuding an effortless charm. His characteristic smile played at the corner of his lips, calmly engaging in handshakes with several prominent visitors in the front row, exchanging brief pleasantries while being fully aware everyone's gaze was fixed on him. He exuded an aura of possessing everything. Unbeknownst to him, he was on the verge of losing it all. Lena stood merely concealed from sight outside the church doors. Her fingers clutched her bouquet securely, and her pulse remained steady. Her breathing was steady. Yet beneath the surface, an electric sensation sparked through her veins. She could perceive the gentle rustling of the bridesmaids adjusted their dresses while Sophia stood a few steps away, her back turned. And Lena did not observe her. Could she not concentrate on the weight of her gown rather than the beautiful lace and the delicate pearl buttons? Soft layers of fabric cascaded down her back, each detail meticulously selected and crafted to enhance her appearance. A wedding planner interjected, indicating that this moment was lovely, albeit not in the manner Mark had envisioned. As the doors were poised to open and the world was on the brink of transformation, Lena took a long breath. Raising her chin in a deliberate manner, a subtle smile emerged as the performance commenced. The imposing cathedral doors swung open, and the room fell into complete silence. Every visitor turned their head, their eyes widening with adoration for the bride, who was lovely, poised, and a vision. Lena advanced, her movements slow and deliberate, each stride down the aisle calculated as she sensed the weight of every sight. She could perceive the muted whispers as Mark's smirk broadened while he saw her approach. Tilting his head, he regarded her with modest admiration, as if admiring a trophy, for he perceived her as a reward, his prize. Lena maintained his gaze, her countenance soft and inscrutable, allowing herself to indulge in pretense for a brief period. He believed she remained the woman he perceived, the admiring, dedicated fiancée. Deeply in love, she would not perceive beyond his charming exterior, beyond the empty promises, beyond the betrayal. She allowed him to maintain that belief. The priest cleared his throat, beaming lovingly at the couple. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the the union of Lena scarcely registered the words. Her heartbeat remained steady, and her mind was acutely concentrated on the forthcoming events. She could perceive James stood silently among the groomsmen, observant and calm, bearing the weight of his presence behind her. Mark's hand remained against hers, his fingers curled possessively around hers, his thumb tracing slowly, absent-mindedly tracing circles on her skin. It appeared to any observer as an intimate and soothing gesture towards Lena. It's like a constricting chain around her wrist. And she sensed the atmosphere in the room saturated with appreciation. The visitors observed with gentle smiles, anticipating the poignant moment when Sarah and Mark would exchange their vows, affirm their affection with a kiss, and embark on their shared destiny. If only they were aware. She cast a glance at Mark, allowing herself to examine him closely. The man she had once adored. The man who had previously instilled in her a sense of safety and value. The man with whom she had envisioned a future to construct a life with. She now perceived only a deceiver. A man utterly absorbed by his ownhis hubris prevented him from contemplating the possibility of defeat. While she allowed a subtle, nearly undetectable smile to emerge as he contemplated the imminent loss of everything. The priest raised his head, his eyes warm and expectant. "Lena, do you take this man too?" Lena did not respond. Instead, she gradually raised her free hand, causing the room to fall silent. Lena shifted slightly alongside her, and he spoke just loud enough for her to hear. As she turned her head to face him, she remained silent for a minute, allowing him to endure the heavy, pulsating tension of his gaze. Abruptly occupied the space. And then she finally articulated her thoughts. She stated, her voice calmly measured. "Before I respond, I believe there is something everyone should observe." Perplexity darted across Mark's expression. Changed. But before he could utter a word, the enormous LED screen behind them illuminated, initially displaying only static, ensued, followed by a fleeting second of garbled audio, after which the initial image emerged. A photograph of Mark shirtless, reclining in his arm, was encircled around a woman who was evidently not Lena. Eliciting a scream from the audience, whispered a subdued, astonished, "Oh my God!" Mark's entire body tensed, and his grip on Lena's hand intensified. Although she remained unresponsive. Flinch. Another photo emerged, followed by yet another, each progressively more distressing than the previous, succeeded by the messages, screenshots of texts, vivid and undeniable. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Wish I were in your bed instead." Lena. Uncertainty prevails. It appears excessively simplistic. The gasps deepened, the whispers grew louder, and a wave of murmurs surfaced, moving through the crowd. The final blow was delivered as Mark's voice resonated over the speakers with crystal clarity. "She is really a trophy wife, sweet, dedicated, and entirely oblivious." The room erupted, and Mark's mother emitted a faint sound. A choked whimper escaped as she pressed her palm to her mouth, her face ashen, while his father's look shifted to one of utter frigid loathing. Guests whispered intensely, some shifting uneasily in their chairs while others stared at the screen in astonishment as Mark approached forward, panic flaring in his eyes. He exclaimed, his voice, unnecessarily elevated, said, "This is fake." Lena chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Really, Mark? Is that the best you can do?" The noise intensified as individuals exchanged murmurs of astonishment and dismay. Mark's urgency became more acute as he urged Lena to listen to me. "Oh, I am not yet finished." Silence. "Lena, allow the moment to extend for him to endure its weight." Then, she inhaled deliberately, and uttered the words that would dismantle any last illusion Mark has, also. She allowed her hand to fall. Her abdomen glided over the intricate lace of her gown. "I'm pregnant," she announced, eliciting gasps from several audience members entering the room abruptly. Mark's body twitched slightly, and his eyes widened. "You're pregnant, Lena?" Maintained his stare. For an instant, an enigmatic flicker appeared in Mark's expression. Perhaps hope. A desperate effort to preserve his diminishing control ensued. Although Lena's smile ultimately deepened the father's anguish, she remarked, her tone light and even conversational, "It is not your silence." An oppressive, profound hush enveloped the room, as if it had collectively forgotten the act of respiration. Mark's lips parted slightly, yet no sound emerged. followed by the scratching of a chair against the floor, revealing a figure, James, whose presence was palpable. He maintained a steady calm, and when he spoke, his voice was clear and unwavering. In contrast to you, Mark. James stated that his eyes were fixed on his brother, declaring, "I will cherish her." Gasps. Mark. He staggered slightly as if he had just been physically assaulted, his face turned pale, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. "You're deceiving." Lena did not flinch. James advanced cautiously. "I have previously informed you." Mark. He whispered. Mark's breath was irregular. His entire body felt taut, as if he were on the brink of breaking. And Lena, she had never experienced such lightness. For a while, there was only silence, thick, heavy, and oppressive. Then suddenly, the tension contorted Mark's face, twisted in rage, his hands clenched at his sides, his chest heaving, and his breathing labored. His mind frantically sought control, an escape, or any means to reverse the catastrophe occurring around him. His gaze shifted from the screen, which remained frozen on the incriminating messages, to his mother, who was observing him intently. She appeared not to recognize him. His father's expression was chilly and inscrutable, as were the visitors, whispering vehemently. Their looks fluctuated from amazement to disdain, while James remained composed and resolute with shoulders straightened. She regarded him with unwavering confidence, prompting a visceral eruption of fury within Mark. Mark made a swift and reckless lunge, his hands reaching out towards James as if he were empowered to tear him apart, isolated. Yet James was prepared. In one fluid motion, he sidestepped, seized Mark's wrist, and twisted it. Mark emitted a sound of discomfort. James emitted a piercing groan of pain as he pulled his arm back, causing him to stumble. His knee buckled before he could regain his balance. James executed a rapid, precise shove to Mark's chest, causing him to collapse to the ground, eliciting gasps from onlookers. A muffled wail emanated from the cathedral as the sound of Mark's body striking the smooth marble floor reverberated amidst the expansive and relentless void. James remained unflinching, standing above him with a clenched jaw and intense gaze. "Steady. Sit down, Mark," he ordered coolly. "You've embarrassed yourself sufficiently." Mark grumbled, rolling onto his side, his face overwhelmed by embarrassment. He attempted to rise, but his limbs felt feeble, and his pride lay in ruins under the burden. Mark found himself frozen as he stood on the stairs, his father's voice piercing the air like a knife. Gradually, he pivoted his head toward the sound, where his father, perpetually collected and in charge, was gazing at him. Mark had an emotion he had never encountered before, neither disappointment nor rage, but something more severe: revulsion. "You have sufficiently brought dishonor upon this family," his father spoke in a low, menacing tone. "I will not permit you to bear our name after this." Mark's gut churned with angry intensity. "Father declared, you are no son of mine." The words struck with the weight of a death sentence. The atmosphere already dense with tension, the tension appeared to diminish around them. Mark's breath faltered, and his vision blurred at the periphery as he shook his head, rapidly rising to his feet. Hands trembling, he exclaimed, "No, you cannot mean that." His father's expression remained unchanged. Mark sensed his universe constricting. His father had consistently supported and defended him, regardless of his actions, of how cruel his decisions had been. He was now being discarded as if he were nothing. His mother averted her gaze, unable to confront him, while his business associates occupied the front row. They were already examining their phones, undoubtedly dispatching messages to dissolve relations and distance themselves from him before the scandal proliferated. He felt nauseated. Then, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Sophia was advancing cautiously in the side aisle. She clutched her purse tightly, attempting to depart unseen, but fortune was not in her favor. A cousin of Mark's spoke up, her tone stern and accusatory, inquiring, "Where do you think you're going?" Heads turned, attention diverted. Sophia became immobilized, her complexion draining of color. "I just require some air," she stated. Another guest emitted a sardonic laugh, exclaiming, "Oh, darling, you require a miracle." A wave of frigid amusement coursed through the room. Lena saw as comprehension dawned on Sophia's expression. She had meticulously cultivated her persona over the years, formerly a reliable confidant, now perceived solely as a deceiver and a homewrecker. Sophia's gaze flicked to Lena, silently imploring her to act. But Lena merely cocked her head. Her expression unchanged. Sophia's lips opened as if she wished to implore an explanation. Although what remained was unarticulated, could she assert that she had not intended to deceive Lena and had not premeditated engaging in a liaison with her best friend's fiancé. Lena was indifferent to excuses. And evidently, so was everyone else. As before Sophia could, another guest mumbled, "Disgusting," as she opened her mouth. And soon the whispers intensified, whirling about her densely with discernment. Sophia exhaled unsteadily and turned to Mark as if he were her sole lifeline, a person who would support her. Although Mark remained unresponsive, his body rigid and his expression strained, Sophia gulped hard, the truth striking her with force. He was not going to defend her. Despite the risks she had taken for him, Mark prioritized his own survival over any risks associated with her. She was considered collateral damage. Sophia exhaled sharply before pivoting and forcefully pushing past the others. The crowd exited via the side door. No one impeded her or expressed concern. And in an instant, she vanished. Mark remained standing in the ruins of his own creation, the burden of it all suddenly resting upon his shoulders. The respect he had devoted years to his familial support had dissipated. His power had vanished, yet Lena remained standing tall, her veil slightly askew and flowers still in hand. Mark finally compelled himself to gaze at her. There was a sense of desperation in his gaze. "Lena," he began to speak in a gruff voice. And she smiled, neither cruel nor sarcastic, but rather as if she had already progressed. As he had, Mark sensed an internal disintegration. The ensuing silence was now distinct, lacking its previous sharpness. The astonished congregation that had filled the cathedral moments ago when Mark's treachery was revealed. The priest stood at the altar. He shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat as his gaze darted between Lena, who remained standing, her wedding gown, and Mark, who remained immobilized while his world disintegrated around him amidst the audience's moans. Had subsided, although the burden of 1,000 unarticulated sentences lingered in the atmosphere until the priest finally spoke. The voice was hesitant and apprehensive. "Did we proceed with this wedding?" Lena expressed a gentle exhalation, scarcely acknowledging that she had been holding her breath. Yet one matter remained. James. She shifted slightly. She searched for him among the groomsmen. He remained motionless and silent. Yet his presence was unwavering. His hands steady. His hands remained in his pockets. His jaw clenched, and his eyes fixed on hers with an expression she could not really identify at that moment, as though making an instantaneous choice. He advanced a step, followed by another. Lena's heart faltered in the intervening space. They exchanged a charged silence as James approached her without hesitation, fixing his gaze upon her for an extended while. His countenance was inscrutable, as if he were seeking something within her gaze. Before he descended to, as James knelt, a collective gasp resonated through the crowd, and Lena's breath became constricted in her throat as he extended his hand towards her. His grip was warm and steady. "Marry me instead," he stated. It was not a question. Nor was it even. It was a plea. A promise. A vow. Lena's fingers instinctively curled around his. Her pulse racing, she experienced a sensation of the earth shifting beneath her, as if the entire universe had shifted in one direction. "James," she muttered. Her voice was scarcely audible as his thumb caressed her knuckles slowly and intentionally. "I understand that this was not the intended outcome," he stated in a subdued tone, audible only to her. That he understood. She likely did not anticipate this. "But you merit more than what Mark provided. You deserve a companion who will support you and be loyal. Someone who will love you as you rightfully deserve." Lena had a constriction in her throat as James grasped her palm firmly, softly reassuring her. He stated, "I will not harm you as he did. I will not deceive you or use you. I will dedicate every day proves that you are not a trophy to win, but a woman to cherish." Lena's vision became somewhat obscured. She had invested some time feeling foolish, exploited, and discarded. She had spent hours contemplating whether she had ever truly experienced love. Yet here I was, gazing down at James, the man who has remained by my side throughout all of this. She recognized that he had never perceived her as a prize or an object of manipulation. but rather as her true self. Including her lips she parted slightly, her heart racing, but before she could speak, a bitter, broken voice interrupted the silence. "Surely you jest." Mark. He remained there, disheveled and ashamed, although his countenance had now changed, contorted with an underlying fury. His laughter was incisive and devoid of humor. "Is this some form of jest? Do you believe this?" James did not acknowledge him. His gaze was fixed on Lena, rendering Mark invisible. Nothing else in the room was significant. Lena sensed an internal transformation as she had long sought closure. She was seeking a significant event that would ultimately make her feel victorious. Even though it was unnecessary, as Mark had already achieved it, having already lost. She grasped James's hand firmly to calm herself, and then, without hesitation or a backward glance, the cathedral resonated with gasps, yells, and an enthusiastic murmur as individuals nodded in affirmation. The crowd saw as James's lips parted slightly, as if he had not anticipated her to utter those words. But then his expression transformed into a gradual, awe-inspiring smile, the type she had never seen on Mark. A smile that conveyed significance. He stood, his hold still solid in hers, his presence warm and persistent. The priest, who had evidently never encountered a similar situation previously. He cleared his throat once more and said, "Well then, shall we?" Lena sighed slowly, turning back toward the altar and glancing at the aisle where the guests continued to stare at her. Mark observed the astonished expressions of Mark's parents and the critical gazes from the business elite. The piercing shine of 100 phones recorded every second of this moment. She then turned to James and smiled, affirming, "Yes," once more. Her voice was more assertive. "Let'n continue." Mark emitted a choked noise, as if he were on the verge of speaking. But his father's frigid gaze silenced him before he could utter a word. Prompting the priest to immediately straighten up, he squared his shoulders and commenced anew. This time, when Lena spoke, "I do." She genuinely meant it. "James." He placed the ring onto Lena's finger, his touch lingering, warm and steady, as the gravity of the moment settled between them, palpable and unwavering. The priest, still appearing somewhat astonished, cleared his throat once again. "You may now kiss the bride." Lena. She scarcely had a moment to respond when James softly positioned her face. His hands firm as if this had always been predestined. His touch was warm and grounded, in stark contrast to the cold, calculated manner in which Mark had once touched her. He hesitated momentarily. For a brief moment, it appeared as though he was affording her the opportunity to withdraw, as if he desired this to be her decision. But she did not retreat. Instead, she leaned in. The minute their lips made contact, the world around them vanished. The gasps, the whispers, the weight of 100 stares dissipated entirely when James kissed her, akin to a promise or a pledge that transcended superficiality for the first time in a long while. Lena was not preoccupied with the past or with Mark. She contemplated the betrayal and pain associated with the moment when James's hands grasped her as if she were something significant. She enjoyed the subtle tension in the way his lips touched hers. Firm yet cautious, profound yet deliberate, as if relishing each moment. James placed his forehead against hers after they eventually separated, his breath warm against her skin. Lena's heart pounded. Still, she was not anxious. A slow, knowing smile pulled at her lips. James mumbled, "You're stuck with me now," prompting Lena to emit a quiet laugh, the first authentic one she had experienced in some time, what appeared to be an eternity of goodness. She whispered, as the room erupted in cheers and James intertwined his fingers through hers and drew her near once more. Lena recognized that this was precisely where she belonged. The reception was enveloped in golden light emanates from the delicate fairy lights suspended between the trees, enveloping the surroundings in a pleasant, dreamlike haze. Laughter and music permeated the atmosphere, harmonizing effortlessly with the clinking of champagne glasses, and the distant murmur of the conversation was vibrant, filled with celebratory whispers of congratulations amidst stolen looks and fresh starts. Mark felt ensconced in the shadows. Just outside the illumination, he observed Lena traverse the dance floor, her robe reflecting the light, her laughter gentle. Among a profound emptiness, she was radiant, radiating in a manner he had never witnessed before. While alongside her, James laid his hand, His hand was delicate yet assured as it rested solidly on Lena's waist. As if he had always belonged there and always would. Swayed harmoniously in synchronization, isolated in a realm that had excluded him. Mark's fingers clenched into fists despite this. The situation was not as anticipated. Lena exhaled gently while leaning her head against James's shoulder. The consistent cadence of their song rendered her weightless. She breathed gently. Scrutinizing him intently, there was an alteration in the manner he gazed at her now. Something recognizable yet wholly novel. "How long she inquired. Her voice almost audible. James arched an eyebrow. How long have you harbored these feelings?" Lena exhaled in amusement. "Recalling the moment you first laughed at one of my dreadful jokes." "James, he consistently makes dreadful jokes," he stated with a grin. "And you are the sole individual who ever finds them amusing," she replied with a roll of her eyes. Her eyes sparkled playfully. Yet she sensed a warmth enveloping her chest. "That's not true." "Oh, it is," he replied, gently lowering her slightly prior to retracting her. "I would first assess them on Mark to determine if I had a chance with Lean." I suppressed a smile. And James sneered, giving me a deadpan expression, exclaiming, Jesus, James is. This is why Mom continues to inquire whether you own a legitimate occupation." Lena chuckled, her laughter light and sincere, reminiscent of him. "James," he smirked, his fingertips gliding over her back in slow, languid circles. "Do you want to know something else? You created it. It is really difficult for me to harbor animosity towards him." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Hate him?" James inquired, tilting his head as he scrutinized her. "We're perpetually faithful. Consistently defending him and regarding him as the most exceptional entity in existence." Lena found it aggravating as she swallowed. Prompted by James's comment while combing a stray curl, "I desired to be the one you gazed at in that manner." Her breath momentarily halted, rendering her speechless. She could only let those words linger. James must have observed this. As his smirk diminished. An alternative. A profound, a deliberate pause. He allowed the stillness to extend between them as if granting her it was time for him to comprehend his recent admission. But Lena required no such time. As she was already aware, perhaps she had always known, Lena, formerly blind, suddenly perceived everything with clarity. As she breathed and tilted her head, she lifted her head to meet his eyes. "You no longer need to wish for that." James paused and then, gradually, moved gently. A magnificent smile illuminated his face as he said, and Lena nodded in response with his fingers gripping the lapel of his suit. James gently exhaled, his forehead resting against it. Her guess was that she finally uttered a joke worthy of laughter. He mumbled, and Lena chuckled gently, shaking her head. "Shut up." James danced with her, twirling her beneath the illumination of the fairy lights, their laughter harmonizing as they moved together in a society that was ultimately theirs. Mark, observing from the shadows, recognized that certain betrayals were inevitable. Break you, liberate others.